The engine in the back row. The engine wasn't supposed to matter. By 9 in the morning, most of the decent equipment at the county surplus auction had already attracted attention. Contractors moved through the rows with coffee cups in hand. Farmers kicked tires. Dealers compared notes while checking serial numbers on their phones. Ray Mercer stood apart from them. He wasn't there looking for opportunity. He was there looking for anything he could afford. The collar of his faded work jacket was turned up against the cold wind. At 48, he carried himself like a man who had spent most of his life leaning over machinery. His hands were rough, permanently stained with oil that never seemed to wash away completely. Business at Mercer Repair had been declining for years. The old factories outside town had closed one after another. Fewer farms needed independent mechanics. More equipment came with computerized systems that required expensive diagnostic tools Ray couldn't justify buying. Every month felt narrower than the last. A loudspeaker crackled overhead as another tractor sold. Ray barely listened. His attention had drifted toward the far edge of the lot. Beyond the rows of equipment that people actually cared about sat a cluster of neglected machinery waiting for scrap buyers. Bent frames, corroded generators, pieces missing. No one spent much time there. But something had caught his eye. An engine. It sat alone on a weathered pallet, half covered by a torn blue tarp. Rust coated nearly every visible surface. The exhaust manifold looked damaged. One mounting bracket had snapped clean off years ago. From a distance, it looked worthless. Ray walked closer. The wind tugged at the tarp as he crouched beside it. For several seconds, he simply stared. Something felt familiar. Not recognizable, familiar. Like hearing a song from childhood and remembering only the feeling, not the melody. He ran his fingers across the engine block. Beneath the rust, he noticed machining marks. Precise ones. Too precise. Most industrial engines from that era carried obvious signs of mass production. This one didn't. The details seemed unusually careful, almost personal. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "You thinking about buying that thing?" Ray looked up. An older auction worker stood nearby holding a clipboard. Ray shrugged. "Just looking." The man laughed. "You're the first person all morning." He glanced toward the engine. "Nobody knows where it came from. Been sitting in county storage forever." "Any paperwork?" "Nothing useful," the worker shook his head. "Probably headed to scrap if nobody takes it." Ray nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the engine. The auction continued. Equipment changed hands. Prices climbed beyond what he could afford. By early afternoon, the crowd had thinned. The rusted engine finally came up. The auctioneer sounded almost bored reading the description. No manufacturer listed. Unknown condition. Sold as is. Silence followed. No bids. The auctioneer tried again. Still nothing. Ray felt something unexpected. Not excitement. A strange discomfort. The idea of the engine being melted down bothered him more than it should have. He lifted his bidding card. The auctioneer acknowledged him immediately. No one countered. Seconds later, the engine belonged to Ray Mercer, for less than the cost of a month's electric bill. As workers loaded it onto his aging flatbed truck, Ray wondered whether he'd made a mistake. It wouldn't be the first time. The drive back to town took 40 minutes. Gray clouds gathered overhead. The old industrial district appeared on the horizon, its abandoned smokestacks rising above empty warehouses. Ray had spent nearly 20 years servicing equipment in those buildings. The sight always left him unsettled. His repair shop sat near the edge of town beside a disused rail line. The sign above the garage door had faded badly. Several letters had peeled away. Mercer Repair. Family owned since 1978. Ray's father had started the business, back when there was enough work for 3 mechanics. Now there was only Ray. He backed the truck into the garage. The engine looked even worse under proper lighting. Rust flaked onto the concrete floor. Several bolts appeared fused in place. The wiring was almost completely deteriorated. Ray removed his jacket and got to work. Not because he expected a profit, because curiosity had already taken hold. Hours passed. The shop settled into its familiar evening rhythm. Tools clinked softly. A portable radio played low country music from a shelf. Rain began tapping against the roof. Ray worked methodically. Brush, scrape, clean, inspect. The process was slow, almost meditative. Years ago, he had loved this part of the job. Before invoices, before late payments, before worrying whether the shop would survive another winter. Back then, solving mechanical puzzles had been enough. As layers of grime disappeared, new details emerged. Unusual welds, custom fittings, modified cooling channels. Nothing about the engine felt standard. Whoever built it had known exactly what they were doing. Ray paused. He leaned closer to one section near the rear housing. There, a marking, almost hidden beneath corrosion. He grabbed a flashlight. The beam illuminated faint stamped characters. Not a manufacturer logo, not a model number, a serial sequence. He copied it onto a notepad, then spent 20 minutes searching through online databases. Nothing. No match. Not even a partial record. That was unusual. Very unusual. Outside, rain intensified. Water drummed against the metal roof. The workshop felt smaller in the growing darkness. Ray returned to cleaning, now more focused than before. The engine had become a question, and he needed answers. Near midnight, his flashlight revealed something strange. A seam, perfectly straight, hidden beneath years of rust. He frowned. Engine castings weren't supposed to look like that, at least not in that location. He wiped the area clean. The seam continued several inches before disappearing behind a support bracket. His pulse quickened slightly, not from excitement, from curiosity. He retrieved a small inspection mirror and angled the light. The seam outlined a rectangular shape, a compartment, concealed inside the engine itself. Ray sat back on his stool. For a moment, he simply listened. Rain, wind, the distant creak of the building settling. Then he leaned forward again. The compartment appeared intentionally hidden, not something added later, designed that way from the beginning, which raised a simple question. Why? He examined the surrounding metal. He located what looked like a tiny recessed latch buried beneath corrosion. Someone had gone to considerable effort to keep this compartment unnoticed. Ray stared at it. The engine no longer felt like scrap. It felt like a message, one left behind by someone who never expected it to be found. Slowly, he reached for a screwdriver. The latch resisted, then moved, just slightly, enough to tell him it still worked. Ray stopped. The clock on the wall read 12:17 a.m. He should have gone home hours ago. Instead, he sat alone in the workshop, staring at a hidden compartment inside a forgotten machine no one else wanted. The questions multiplying faster than the answers, and for the first time in a long while, the future felt uncertain in a way that wasn't frightening. It felt interesting. He looked at the compartment one last time, then switched off the overhead lights. The shop fell into darkness. Only the rain remained. Tomorrow he would open it, and whatever had been hidden inside for decades would finally see daylight again. The man who disappeared. Rain still clung to the workshop windows when Ray unlocked the garage the next morning. The hidden compartment was the first thing he thought about. Not the overdue invoice sitting on his desk, not the pickup truck waiting outside for a brake repair, not the electric bill folded inside his jacket pocket. The compartment. For the first time in years, he had arrived at the shop before sunrise. The building felt different. The same concrete floor, the same smell of oil and steel, the same faded calendars hanging on the wall. Yet something beneath the ordinary routine had changed. A question was waiting, and Ray had never been good at leaving questions unanswered. He switched on the lights and walked straight to the engine. The compartment looked smaller in daylight, less mysterious, almost disappointing. For a moment he wondered if he had imagined its importance. Then he carefully worked the latch free. Metal groaned softly. The hidden panel shifted. A thin cloud of dust drifted into the air. Ray froze. Inside was a narrow cavity, barely large enough to hold a few documents. Most were wrapped in oilcloth that had long since hardened with age. He pulled them out carefully. The paper crackled beneath his fingers. Years of moisture had stained the edges. Some sheets were nearly unreadable. Others had survived surprisingly well. Ray carried everything to his workbench. Sunlight filtered through the dirty windows as he began unfolding the documents. The first pages appeared to be engineering sketches, not factory blueprints, hand-drawn, precise, detailed, the kind created by someone who understood machinery well enough to visualize every component before touching a tool. Ray leaned closer. Measurements filled the margins. Calculations, notes, corrections. The handwriting was neat but hurried, as if the writer had been racing against time. Then he noticed a name, Walter Bishop. The signature appeared in the lower corner. Ray frowned. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. He searched through the remaining papers. More sketches, technical diagrams, design notes. Then a folded letter. The paper had yellowed badly. Several lines were unreadable, but one paragraph remained clear. If the prototype functions as expected, fuel consumption should decrease by at least 22% under continuous industrial load. Ray read it twice. 22%. Even today, that kind of improvement would attract attention. 30 years ago, it could have changed everything. He sat back slowly. This wasn't some hobby project. Whoever Walter Bishop had been, he was working on something serious, something significant. The rest of the day passed in fragments. Customers came and went. Repairs were completed. Phones rang. Yet Ray's mind remained fixed on the documents. By late afternoon, he finally gave in. He locked the shop early and drove downtown. The public library occupied an old brick building that had somehow survived the town's decline. Inside, only a few patrons occupied the reading area. Most of the shelves felt untouched. A librarian looked up as Ray approached. "Can I help you find something?" "Maybe." He hesitated, looking for information on someone named Walter Bishop. The librarian considered the name, then disappeared into a back office. Several minutes later, she returned carrying a box. Local archives. Ray thanked her and carried it to a table. Dust rose as he opened the lid. The contents looked ordinary enough. Old newspaper clippings, factory newsletters, community bulletins. Then he found a photograph, a black and white image from nearly 40 years earlier. Several men stood beside industrial equipment outside a manufacturing plant. One face had been circled in pen. Walter Bishop. Ray studied him. The man looked younger than expected, maybe mid-30s, thin, serious, the expression of someone more comfortable thinking than talking. The accompanying article described him as a promising mechanical engineer involved in energy efficiency research for regional manufacturing operations. Promising. The word appeared repeatedly. Promising engineer, promising inventor, promising future. Then the article stopped. Abruptly. For nearly 20 minutes, Ray found nothing else, until a final clipping surfaced near the bottom of the box. Its headline was small, easy to miss. Local invention project collapses after investor withdrawal. The article described financial losses, failed partnerships, missed deadlines. The project dissolved. Walter Bishop disappeared from public view shortly afterward. No follow-up, no explanation, no conclusion, just an ending, or at least what appeared to be one. Ray stared at the article. Something felt wrong, not factually wrong, incomplete, like a story missing its final pages. Outside, evening settled over town. Streetlights flickered to life. The old industrial district glowed faintly against the darkening sky. Instead of driving home, Ray headed there. He wasn't entirely sure why. Instinct, perhaps, or curiosity refusing to let go. The factory mentioned in the article still stood, abandoned. Its windows boarded, its parking lot cracked by decades of neglect. Ray parked nearby. The building looked enormous against the fading light. Silent, yet not empty, not emotionally. Places where people spend years of their lives rarely become empty. They hold on to traces, memories, stories, failures, dreams. As he sat there, an elderly man emerged from a nearby maintenance shed, carrying a flashlight. The man noticed Ray immediately. "You lost?" Ray stepped out of the truck. "Just looking." The caretaker nodded toward the factory. "A lot of people do that." After a brief conversation, Ray mentioned Walter Bishop. The caretaker's expression changed. 30 days later. The workshop lights had remained on for so many late nights that Ray barely noticed when darkness fell anymore. For nearly a month, the rusted engine had consumed every spare hour he had. Not because he expected money from it, not because anyone was paying attention, but because every day seemed to uncover another piece of Walter Bishop's unfinished story. And now, on the 30th day, the engine stood fully assembled in the center of the shop. Cleaner, stronger, alive again. The rust was gone. The damaged components had been repaired or rebuilt. New seals sat where old ones had cracked decades earlier. Fresh wiring followed the original pathways carefully documented in Walter's notes. Yet despite all the progress, one problem remained. Ray still didn't fully understand what the machine was designed to do. The mystery had narrowed, but it hadn't disappeared. Outside, dawn painted the sky pale gray. Inside the workshop, the air smelled of warm metal and machine oil. Ray stood quietly beside the engine. A coffee cup rested on the workbench, cold, forgotten. His daughter Emma sat nearby with a laptop. Over the past few weeks, she had become part of the project almost without realizing it. At first, she had visited only occasionally. Then she started helping organize documents, digitizing sketches, researching old company records. Now she showed up nearly every evening. The project had become theirs. "What if we're still missing something?" Emma asked. Ray wiped his hands with a shop rag. "We probably are." She looked up. "That doesn't bother you?" "It always bothers me." He smiled faintly. "That's how you know you're getting close." Emma laughed. The sound echoed softly through the building. For a moment neither spoke. The engine sat between them, waiting, much like it had waited for decades. Ray stepped forward and reached for the starter system. Over the previous week, they had managed brief test runs. The machine would start, operate for several minutes, then shut down unexpectedly. Every attempt ended the same way, yet each failure revealed something new. Today felt different, not because of confidence, because they had run out of theories. This was the last one. Ray pressed the ignition. The starter engaged. Metal rotated. A deep mechanical rhythm slowly emerged, then strengthened. The engine came alive. The sound filled the workshop. Not loud, steady, purposeful. Ray watched gauges carefully. Temperature rising, oil pressure stable, fuel flow normal. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 5, longer than ever before. Emma glanced at him. Neither spoke. They were afraid to interrupt the moment. The engine continued running, smoothly, almost effortlessly. Then something happened. A secondary shaft hidden beneath the housing began rotating, slowly at first, then faster. Ray stepped closer. His eyes narrowed. They had focused on the engine itself. Now the hidden mechanism finally activated. A series of interconnected components began moving in precise synchronization. Valves opened. Pressure changed. Energy normally wasted through heat and exhaust was redirected through an auxiliary system. Ray froze, not because he was surprised, because he suddenly understood. Walter's invention had never been about generating power. It was about preserving it, recovering energy that traditional industrial systems simply discarded. The realization settled over him gradually, like sunlight emerging through fog. Walter hadn't built a better engine, he had built a smarter one, and decades earlier, before efficiency became a major industrial priority, almost nobody would have appreciated its significance. Emma stared at the moving components. "What does it mean?" Ray looked at the old sketches spread across the workbench, then back at the machine. "It means he was right." The words felt heavier than expected. For several seconds, neither moved. The engine continued humming steadily. Proof. Actual proof. Not theory, not speculation, proof. The following week passed quickly. News of the restoration spread through local engineering circles after Emma posted a short video online. Unexpectedly, interest followed. One message led to another, then another. Soon an invitation arrived, a regional engineering exhibition held several counties away. Organizers wanted to see the machine. Ray nearly declined. Public attention had never interested him, but Emma convinced him. Not for recognition, for Walter. Somebody should know what he accomplished. Those words stayed with Ray because they were true. The exhibition occupied a renovated manufacturing facility, once similar to the factories Walter had hoped to help. Rows of displays filled the building. Students, engineers, inventors, historians, people moved between exhibits discussing ideas and technology. Ray felt completely out of place. His jacket smelled faintly of motor oil. His hands still carried traces of workshop grime, yet somehow that felt appropriate. Machines weren't built in conference rooms. They were built by people willing to get dirty. When their turn arrived, Ray rolled the restored engine into position. The crowd remained modest. A handful of engineers, several local journalists, a few curious visitors. Nothing dramatic, nothing grand, exactly the way Walter probably would have preferred. Ray explained the restoration, the hidden documents, the missing history. Then he started the engine. The familiar rhythm filled the room. As the auxiliary recovery system activated, several engineers stepped closer. Questions followed. Detailed ones, technical ones, the kind that only appear when people recognize genuine innovation. Ray answered as best he could, sometimes using Walter's notes, sometimes using his own observations, sometimes admitting he didn't know. and somehow that honesty mattered more than certainty. For nearly an hour, people studied the machine, discussed it, photographed it, not as a curiosity, as a meaningful piece of engineering history. By the end of the day, historians had already begun investigating Walter Bishop's original work more thoroughly. His name was being spoken again, not as a failure, as a contributor, as an inventor, as someone who had seen possibilities others missed. Months later, autumn arrived. Leaves gathered along the abandoned rail line beside Mercer Repair. Business remained modest. Ray wasn't rich. The workshop wasn't transformed into a thriving empire. Life stayed remarkably ordinary, and somehow that made everything better. One evening, after finishing a routine repair, Ray noticed something mounted beside the office entrance. A small plaque. Emma had installed it without telling him. Simple brushed metal, nothing flashy. Just two names, Walter Bishop, Ray Mercer. Some work deserves a second chance. Ray stood silently for a long moment. The setting sun cast warm light across the workshop floor. Outside, traffic moved through town. Inside, the restored engine rested quietly in the corner. Not forgotten, not abandoned, not lost. A bridge between two lives that had never met. Emma appeared in the doorway. "You like it?" Ray looked at the plaque, then at the engine, then at his daughter. "Yeah." His voice was softer than usual. "I do." As evening settled over the building, Emma switched off the workshop lights. Darkness slowly filled the room. Yet one sound remained, the gentle hum of the restored system completing its final cooling cycle. Steady, persistent, alive. For decades, Walter Bishop's work had waited in silence. Now it had finally been heard, and in preserving another man's legacy, Ray had quietly rediscovered his own. The workshop door closed. The town settled into night. But inside that small garage near the old rail line, a forgotten story had finally reached its ending. Not with fame, but with something far rarer, a chance to be remembered. The letters that came back. Winter arrived quietly that year. The first snow fell during the night. By morning, the rooftops across town were covered in a thin white layer, and the old rail line beside Mercer Repair looked almost peaceful. Ray stood at the workshop window with a mug of coffee in his hand. Business was steady, not booming, not struggling, steady. For the first time in years, that felt like enough. The restored engine remained in its corner of the shop. People still stopped by to see it. Students, retired engineers, local history enthusiasts. Sometimes they came because they had heard about Walter Bishop, sometimes because they had heard about Ray. Most left talking about both. Ray never got comfortable with the attention. He preferred fixing hydraulic pumps and rebuilding transmissions. Machines made sense. People were more complicated. The bell above the shop door rang. Ray turned. A delivery driver stepped inside, carrying a cardboard box. No signature needed. The driver placed it on the counter and left. Ray frowned. There was no return address, only his name. He carried the box to the workbench and opened it carefully. Inside were envelopes, dozens of them. Old envelopes, some yellowed with age, others still sealed. For several seconds he simply stared. Then he noticed a note attached to the top. "Mr. Mercer, I saw the exhibition coverage several months ago. Afterward, I discovered these among my late father's belongings. He worked with Walter Bishop during the final years of the project. I believe these belong with the rest of the story. Daniel Price." Ray sat down slowly. The workshop suddenly felt very quiet. He opened the first envelope. The handwriting matched Walter's. Immediately, there was no doubt. The same neat lettering, the same precise style. The letter wasn't technical. It was personal, a message written to a colleague. Ray read silently. Walter described equipment delays, funding problems, long nights spent redesigning components. Yet what struck Ray most wasn't the engineering. It was the tone. Walter sounded hopeful, determined, nothing like the defeated figure described in old newspaper articles. Over the following days, Ray read every letter. Some were addressed to business partners, some to suppliers, others to friends. Together they painted a very different picture. Walter had not abandoned his work. He had been trying desperately to save it, again and again, until circumstances finally overwhelmed him. One evening, Emma arrived after work, carrying takeout containers. She found her father surrounded by papers, more papers than usual. New discovery? Ray handed her a letter. She read quietly, then looked up. He knew things were falling apart. Ray nodded. He also thought he'd fix it. Emma sat beside him. The workshop heater hummed softly in the background. Outside, snow drifted against the windows. "What happened to him?" she asked. Ray leaned back. That question still bothered him. Despite everything they had uncovered, Walter's final years remained unclear. The records simply stopped. No obituary, no interviews, no public explanation, just absence. And absence has a way of becoming its own mystery. A week later, another clue arrived unexpectedly. A retired teacher named Margaret Collins visited the shop. She had seen a newspaper article about the restoration. As soon as she stepped inside, she pointed toward the engine. "I know that machine." Ray nearly laughed. Over the past few months, many people had claimed similar things. Most were mistaken. Margaret wasn't. She walked directly to a specific section of the housing, a place few visitors noticed. "I remember Walter showing us this." Ray exchanged a glance with Emma. "Showing who?" "My science class." Ray blinked. "Your class?" Margaret smiled. It was 1987. The date landed heavily. Years before the project collapsed. Years before Walter disappeared from public life. "He came to our school." She ran her fingers lightly along the metal. "He talked about efficiency, energy, responsibility. He said the future belonged to people willing to improve ordinary things." The workshop fell silent. Margaret laughed softly. "We were teenagers. We barely understood half of it. But he cared." Ray listened carefully. The image forming in his mind was becoming clearer. Not a failed inventor. Not a forgotten genius locked away in isolation. A teacher. A mentor. Someone trying to build something useful. Someone who believed progress belonged to ordinary working people. Before leaving, Margaret paused beside the door. "There was one thing he said." Ray looked up. "He told us that success wasn't always finishing the job yourself." She smiled. "Sometimes success is leaving enough behind for someone else to continue." The words lingered long after she left. That night, Ray remained in the workshop alone. The restored engine sat beneath overhead lights. The letters covered the workbench. Snow tapped softly against the windows. For months he had focused on solving the mechanical mystery. Now he realized something. The machine had never been the whole story. The machine was only evidence. The real story was the person behind it. Walter had spent years trying to create something valuable, not because he wanted recognition, because he wanted it to matter. And despite everything that went wrong, it eventually had, just not in the way he expected. Several months later, the Town Historical Society organized a small community event. Nothing elaborate. A gathering in the old Civic Hall. Photographs lined the walls. Artifacts from local industries filled display cases. Near the center stood Walter's engine. Children walked around it. Parents asked questions. Retired factory workers shared memories. For the first time in decades, conversations about the town's history included people who had nearly been forgotten. Near the end of the evening, Ray noticed something unusual. A teenage boy stood staring at the display. Not casually, seriously, the way engineers look at things. The way Ray had looked at the engine on the auction lot. The boy eventually approached. "Did you really rebuild it?" Ray nodded. The teenager hesitated, then asked a dozen questions in rapid succession. Technical questions, thoughtful ones, questions that revealed genuine curiosity. When the conversation ended, the boy thanked him and walked away. Emma had been watching from across the room. She smiled. "You see it?" Ray nodded. "Yeah, the same spark, the same curiosity, the same beginning." As the event ended and people started heading home, Ray looked once more at the engine. Months earlier, it had been a rusted piece of forgotten machinery no one wanted. Now it had become something else entirely. A story, a connection, a reminder. Not every important legacy arrives with fame. Sometimes it survives because one person refuses to throw something away, and another decides it's worth understanding. Outside, fresh snow covered the streets. Inside, the hall lights slowly dimmed. People gathered their coats. Conversations faded. Yet Walter Bishop's story continued moving forward. Not through headlines, not through fortune, but through memory, through craftsmanship, through people willing to care. And for Ray Mercer, that was more than enough.